and ultimately sold some 3 million copies in 28 languages in its meteoric life. I also taught portrait painting at a California State University, and continued as founder and director of the annual Santa Barbara Writers' Conference for 12 years, one of the most successful in the nation, though I was frequently in recent years too drunk to make the podium to address the 350 would-be writers. My portrait commissions were beginning to fall off because my shaking hands were unable to execute the exacting style of realism which was my forte. My portraits of Sinclair Lewis, Steinbeck, and Truman Capote are in the University of Texas, the Steinbeck Library, and the National Gallery of Art of the Smithsonian, respectively. My portrait of William F. Buckley, Jr. graces the cover of his book Atlantic High, and my charcoal of the Baroness Pauline de Rothschild was featured in Architectural Digest. For a couple of years I had lectured around the country at universities and women's clubs, usually on writing and my experience as Sinclair Lewis's secretary companion, or my early life in bullfighting in Spain, Mexico, and Peru. The fees were good, but I was finding I had to have more and more to drink before I could face the audiences, either the feckless youths of the campus or the elderly blue cotton field of the average women's club. Once I found myself in Salt Lake City, scheduled to address 750 people, and there was no liquor to be had. I was panicky, but managed to agonize through my talk. With all the lectures, it was the socializing with strangers before and after the talk that was so tough. Harry Golden used to answer, when asked how much he charged to speak, $1,000 unless I'm not met at the plane, in which case $900. And if I don't have to go to the luncheon, $800. And if I don't have to go to the tea afterward, $700. Once at a reception after one of my lectures in Ohio, the hostess observed me belting down the scotch and sniffed haughtily, saying, "You know, Mr. Conrad, drinking does not make you more attractive." I bowed slightly and said, "Madam, I don't drink to make myself more attractive. I drink to make you more attractive." I was not asked to speak to that club again, and my lecturing in general dwindled in proportion to the increase of my intake. In spite of the blatant warning signs, I continued to drink. By now I was growing sick and tired of being sick and tired. I was ashamed of my 3 drunk driving arrests and mortified by a jail sentence and loss of my driver's license. But I still kept on drinking. My health had deteriorated alarmingly. As captain of my college boxing team, I had weighed 160. As an amateur bullfighter, I had weighed 175 pounds. Now I carried 225 on my 6'2" frame, 50 extra pounds of fat and bloat. As a result of my alcoholic intake, I was suffering from insomnia, depression, anxiety, high blood pressure, swollen ankles, cramps in my legs, watery eyes, liver damage, rectal bleeding, sick hangovers with prolonged vomiting, shaky hands, and blackouts, with the events of entire evenings sometimes erased. I did not set out to be an alcoholic. No one does. It was just a condition that developed over the years. But now that it had, I had to do something. I had to quit drinking. But how? I would give it up for a few days, maybe a week or two, by a heroic effort, especially if I got a challenging portrait or writing assignment. But drinking never left my subconscious, and I would slip back to it voraciously. I would try limiting myself to a certain amount of alcohol a day, but like Dr. Samuel Johnson, I found it easier to abstain than to moderate. But finally, I found I could not abstain. I tried the beer wagon, then the wine wagon, but I discovered I could do the same job of a pint of gin with 2 bottles of wine or a 6-pack. So I abandoned wine and beer and went back to the hard stuff. I could cut way back for short periods if the motivation to do so was strong enough, greater than the thirst. For example, I love to sculpt in wood, but chisels and knives are tough to handle with alcoholic hands. Once I had a burning urge to do a rearing horse like the one on the frieze of the Parthenon, so I cut out the Tanqueray while I cut out the 2-foot figure in basswood. But in a couple of weeks it was finished. I sold it for $3,000 and went back to the booze. Friends and family members urged me to quit. They begged, cajoled, prayed, and threatened, to no avail. What they didn't realize was that I'd come to a point where I couldn't stop drinking any more than I could stop breathing. The "you'd quit if you loved me" tactic simply doesn't work on a true alcoholic, no matter how much he thinks he wants to. Even the threat of imminent death doesn't deter him. I fell off the wagon, I confessed to my doctor after one 3-week try. "You're going to fall off the world," he exploded. "Just look at this report from the lab." In the face of everything, I persisted in getting drunk to various degrees nearly every day. I celebrated good tidings with drinks, bad news with more. There was no problem or situation, no matter how slight or how serious, that I couldn't make worse by drinking. "Go to Betty Ford's," my concerned ex-father-in-law urged me. "4 whole weeks?" I exclaimed. "And all that money? No way. I'll quit myself." "You have a disease," he said, "like diabetes. I had it too. If you have a disease, you go to a hospital. It's that simple." I didn't buy that disease business, even though the American Medical Association, the World Health Organization, the U.S. Department of Health, the American Psychiatric Association, and the National Council on Alcoholism had so declared it. To me, it was a character weakness that could be overcome simply by putting one's mind to it. My mother and father had character, and so, by God, did I. I would quit next week. No problem, no sweat. Of course, next week never came, and I had dozens of valid reasons why, for myself, my family, and friends. After all, I was still productive, wasn't I? I didn't just sit around in taverns and drink all day. I was still functioning reasonably well in all departments, like a frightening number of alcoholics out there in all walks of life, from surgeons to pilots to accountants. I didn't miss many appointments or deadlines. I answered all letters, and we had an active and far-flung social life. A few of those parties I couldn't quite make. My wife would come up with clever excuses and go alone. One time I went when I shouldn't have, a party attended by the old-time singer Helen O'Connell. A dream girl of mine from my teens, she still looked glamorous, and I was thrilled when I was asked to play the piano for her while she sang Tangerine. I was unable to find the simplest chord, however, and she was forced to sing unaccompanied, to my intense chagrin, frustration, and embarrassment that only more drinks could assuage. I fought drunkenly with my beautiful wife of 25 years a couple of times a week, but we could still make up and make love over a blender full of margaritas of a Sunday morning, and we could still play tennis, quarreling across the net about nothing, about anything. What it was about, of course, unapparent to us, was always directly or indirectly related to alcoholic intake and behavior. We traveled extensively on cruise ships all around Europe and South America, where I would give art classes and lectures to earn our passage. Drinking was good on ships, early and frequent and continual, and no damned cops, 502s, and flashing red lights to worry about, and plenty of fellow imbibers and fresh salt air and a bull shot for the hangovers. I averaged about a book every 3 years, and I kept writing articles for top magazines, one, incidentally and ironically, for Horizon on America's alcoholic writers. I would average about 6 portraits a year, and in 1984 I did a 35 by 10-foot mural for a posh San Francisco restaurant named Harris's, managing not to fall off the scaffolding in the process. I also managed to hang on to a close relationship to my 4 children and 2 stepchildren, 20 years old to 32, though it was often strained to the limit by my drinking. For example, the 2 girls were very hurt, but said they forgave me for being drunk at both their debut cotillions, their big night, held 10 years apart in San Francisco. I was not exclusively a solitary drinker, and, in spite of my intake, we had a large circle of interesting, creative friends who entertained us and whom we entertained at our unique rambling beach house south of Santa Barbara. There was an apocryphal story going around among our hard-drinking friends that after one of our bibulous cocktail parties, the blind pianist George Shearing was elected to drive everyone to the restaurant on the theory that he was the best we had at the time. I went trout fishing like a normal father every summer in Montana with my brother and my eldest son, albeit with a pint of gin, a slime, in creel among the fish, and often my fingers were too trembly to affix